Rambo was a severely emaciated and neglected young bobcat who arrived at a wildlife rescue center with no known history and little hope for the future. After 4 long months without rehabilitation prospects and with his health steadily declining, the center scheduled him for humane euthanasia. His death warrant had already been signed, known only as Case 2847. He waited out his final hours. His story was supposed to end there until at the last moment, an unexpected phone call jolted fate off its rails. A small rescue group called Wild Heart Sanctuary stepped in, placing him in a foster home experienced in caring for injured wildlife. What happens when a private sanctuary, a retired veterinary couple, and one broken predator collide in a last-second gamble for life? This is a story of second chances, of a wild heart that refused to give up, and of the extraordinary journey from death row to a destination no one saw coming. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The fluorescent lights of the Pine Ridge Wildlife Rehabilitation Center cast harsh shadows across the concrete floor as Dr. Margaret Willis made her rounds. That October morning, she'd been the Scent's veterinarian for 15 years, but the weight of certain decisions never got easier. Her clipboard held the week schedule, and one entry made her stomach turn. Bobcat number 2847. Euthanasia scheduled for Friday, 2:00 p.m. She stopped at the enclosure in question, peering through the chain link at the young bobcat huddled in the corner. The animal they'd named Rambo, a cruel irony given his pitiful state, barely lifted his head at her approach. His ribs protruded sharply through patchy fur, and his eyes, which should have blazed with wild ferocity, were dull and lifeless. For months, she whispered to herself, remembering the day he'd arrived. Hiker had found him collapsed near a trail in the Colorado foothills, severely malnourished and showing signs of prolonged captivity. No microchip, no collar, no clues to his past. Just a young bobcat who'd clearly been kept illegally as a pet and then abandoned when he became too much to handle. Margaret had tried everything: special diets, vitamin supplements, environmental enrichment. Nothing sparked the wild instincts necessary for release. Rambo wouldn't hunt live prey, showed no fear of humans, and spent most of his time lying motionless in whatever corner felt safest. The Scent's policy was clear: animals that couldn't be rehabilitated for release and weren't candidates for educational programs had to be humanely euthanized. They simply didn't have the resources for permanent residence. She was about to turn away when her phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Wild Art Sanctuary. Margaret, it's Jennifer Morrison from Wild Art. I heard through the network that you have a bobcat scheduled for euthanasia. Margaret's heart skipped. Wild Art was a small, privately funded sanctuary 2 states over in Wyoming, known for taking on challenging cases other facilities couldn't manage. Yes. But Jennifer, I need to be honest with you. This animal is in rough shape. He's been here 4 months with no progress. He's completely human, imprinted, won't eat properly, and his muscle mass is... Send me his file, Jennifer interrupted gently. We might have an option. 3 days later, Margaret stood in the parking lot, watching as Jennifer and her assistant carefully loaded Rambo's transport crate into their specialized vehicle. The bobcat had barely reacted to the transfer, Another sign of his broken spirit. "You sure about this?" Margaret asked one last time. Jennifer smiled, her weathered face showing years of dedication to lost causes. "We have a foster family with experience in exotic cats. Tom and Linda Brennan. They've worked miracles before. If anyone can reach him, they can." As the van pulled away, Margaret allowed herself a small flame of hope. Maybe Rambo's story wasn't over yet. The Brennan property sprawled across 20 acres of Wyoming countryside, complete with reinforced enclosures and a modified barn that served as a rehabilitation facility. Tom Brennan had spent 30 years as a large animal veterinarian before retiring, and his wife, Linda, had worked alongside him as a veterinary technician. Their retirement plan of traveling the world had taken a different turn when they'd fostered their first injured mountain lion 5 years ago. "He's worse than I expected," Tom said quietly as they peered into the transport crate. Rambo lay curled in a tight ball, his breathing shallow and rapid. The journey had clearly stressed him further. "Let's get him into the quarantine enclosure," Linda suggested, her voice gentle but determined. "No sudden movements, no forcing anything. We go at his pace." The first 2 weeks were agonizing. Rambo refused most food, accepting only small portions of raw chicken when they left the enclosure completely. He spent hours pressed against the farthest wall, eyes tracking every movement beyond his sanctuary. Tom and Linda took turns sitting quietly outside the enclosure, reading books or working on laptops, simply being a non-threatening presence. The breakthrough came on day 18. Linda had been sitting in her usual spot, knitting a scarf for winter when she noticed movement from her peripheral vision. Rambo had crept forward just a few feet and was watching her hands move with the needles. She continued knitting, careful not to make eye contact, and began humming softly an old lullaby her grandmother used to sing. Each day, Rambo ventured a little closer. Tom started bringing his guitar, playing quiet melodies that seemed to soothe the anxious Bobcat. They introduced new foods gradually, discovering that Rambo had a surprising preference for rabbit over chicken, and that he would eat more readily if they stayed nearby rather than leaving. "Look at his eyes," Linda whispered one evening as they watched Rambo actually playing with a feathered toy they'd introduced. "There's something there now, a spark." Tom nodded, noting how the Bobcat's coat was beginning to fill in, the dull brown taking on the healthier amber tones. "He's gaining weight, too. I'd say he's up at least 8 pounds. 6 weeks into his stay, Rambo achieved a milestone that brought tears to Linda's eyes as she approached with his evening meal. Instead of retreating to his corner, he walked toward the fence and made a sound. Not quite a meow, not quite a purr, but something uniquely Bobcat that seemed to say hello. "Tom," she called, her voice shaking with emotion. "Come see this." From that point, Rambo's recovery accelerated. He began using all areas of his enclosure, climbing the platforms they'd installed, batting at hanging toys, and even attempting to stalk the wild rabbits that occasionally hopped past his fence. His appetite improved dramatically, and his muscle tone began returning. But it was what happened next that changed everything. One afternoon, Linda was cleaning Rambo's enclosure while Tom kept watch. They developed a routine where Rambo would move to a holding area during cleaning. But this day was different. Linda bent to collect his food bowl. Rambo approached her slowly, cautiously, and gently butte his head against her leg. "Oh my," she breathed, freezing in place. The bobcat rubbed against her. Again, more confidently this time, and a rumbling purr emanated from his chest. It was the first time he'd voluntarily touched either of them. Tom watched in amazement as his wife slowly lowered her hand, letting Rambo sniff her fingers before gently scratching behind his ears. The purr intensified. "I think," Linda said softly, "we need to talk about his future." That evening, they sat at their kitchen table, watching through the window as Rambo lounged on his platform, looking more relaxed than they'd ever seen him. "He's not releasable," Tom stated the obvious. "Too imprinted, too comfortable with humans. Wild Art wants to place him in their permanent sanctuary," Linda said, but her voice lacked enthusiasm. Tom studied his wife's face. They'd been married 38 years, and he knew that look. But he's bonded with us, Tom. You've seen it. The way he waits by the fence. When he hears our car. How he only purr. For us, not the sanctuary volunteers who visited." And she hesitated. And I've bonded with him, too. I know it's crazy. I know we already have Baxter and Rosie, and we said no more animals, but you want to keep him. Linda met her husband's eyes. "I know it's a huge responsibility. The permits, the inspections, the specialized diet, the vet care. He's not a pet. He's a wild animal who needs specific care. But Tom, I can't explain. It's like he chose us." Tom was quiet for a long moment, watching Rambo through the window. The bobcat was grooming himself, methodically, occasionally pausing to survey his domain with those distinctive, tufted ears swiveling like radar dishes. "We'd need to modify the house," he said. "Finally. Create an indoor-outdoor space where he could be part of the family but still have his own territory." Linda's eyes widened. "You mean?" "I mean," Tom said with a slight smile, "that I married a woman with a heart too big for her own good, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But we do this, right? Full permits, regular inspections, and we work with Wild Art's veterinary team." Linda launched herself across the table, nearly knocking over their coffee cups, in her enthusiasm to hug her husband. The next months were a whirlwind of construction, paperwork, and preparation. They converted their large sunroom into a bobcat-appropriate living space, complete with climbing structures, hiding spots, and easy access to a secure outdoor enclosure. They installed special fencing, double-door entry systems, and worked with exotic animal experts to ensure everything met both legal requirements and Rambo's needs. Baxter, their elderly golden retriever, watched the proceedings with patient curiosity. Rosie, their rescued border collie, who'd always been skittish and anxious, hid under the bed for most of the construction. Finally, on a warm September day, nearly a year after Rambo had first arrived at Pine Ridge, it was time to introduce him to his new home. "You sure about this?" Jennifer from Wild Art asked one last time as they prepared to open the transport crate in the sunroom. Linda and Tom exchanged glances. "We're sure," Linda said firmly. The crate door opened and for a moment nothing happened. Then Rambo's spotted head emerged, his ears swiveling as he took in the new environment. He stepped out cautiously, his padded paws silent on the tile floor. What happened next amazed everyone present. Instead of the fearful exploration they expected, Rambo moved through the space. With calm confidence, he investigated each climbing platform, tested the hammock they'd installed, and then, as if he'd lived there all his life, jumped onto the couch and settled down with a contented sigh. "Well," Jennifer laughed, "I think he's made his decision." The first few weeks required careful management. Rambo and the dogs were kept separated initially, allowed to smell and see each other through barriers. Baxter, true to his golden retriever nature, was immediately accepting, often lying near the glass door that separated the sunroom from the main house, tail wagging whenever Rambo approached. Rosie was a different story. The anxious border collie would bark and retreat whenever she caught sight of the bobcat, but Rambo, displaying remarkable patience, would simply sit by the glass, grooming himself or playing with his toys, seemingly unbothered by her display. The breakthrough with Rosie came unexpectedly. One evening, Tom had accidentally left the sliding door open while bringing in Rambo's dinner. Before anyone could react, Rambo had padded into the main house. Linda's heart stopped as she saw Rosie, frozen on her dog bed, trembling, but Rambo simply walked past her, investigated the kitchen briefly, and then returned to the living room where he jumped onto Tom's recliner and curled up as if he'd done it 1,000 times before. "Nobody move," Tom whispered. They watched in amazement as Rosie, after several minutes of internal debate, crept closer to investigate this strange new housemate. Rambo opened one eye, yawned magnificently, displaying his impressive canines, and went back to sleep. From that moment, an unlikely friendship began to bloom. Rosie, who had always been too anxious to play with other dogs at the park, found a calm confidence in Rambo's presence. The bobcat seemed to have a soothing effect on her, and within weeks they could often be found lying near each other, not quite touching, but clearly comfortable in each other's company. "He's therapeutic for her," Linda observed one evening as they watched Rosie actually initiate play by dropping a tennis ball near Rambo. The bobcat, in typical cat fashion, completely ignored the ball, but the gesture was significant. "He's therapeutic for all of us," Tom replied, scratching Rambo behind the ears as the bobcat sprawled across his lap, purring like a diesel engine. Rambo's quirks and personality emerged more each day. He had an obsession with fresh leaves, particularly maple and oak. Linda would often find him on the screened porch, delicately selecting leaves from the branches she'd bring in, munching on them with the dedication of a gourmet at a fine restaurant. This led to one of the household's most amusing recurring scenes. Rosie, always wanting to be part of whatever Rambo was doing, would attempt to eat leaves, too. Without fail, she would take one bite, make a face of utter disgust, spit it out dramatically, and look at Rambo as if to say, "How can you eat this?" Rambo would continue munching, unperturbed by her theatrical display. "It's like watching a nature documentary. Comedy," Tom would chuckle, filming their antics for the growing collection of videos Linda shared with Wild Art. Rambo developed a routine that revolved around his humans. Mornings began with him stationed at the window, watching for Tom and Linda to come downstairs. He'd greet them with a unique chirping sound that bobcats make very different from a domestic cat's meow. After breakfast, he'd patrol his outdoor enclosure, stalking squirrels he could never catch and sunbathing on his favorite platform. Afternoons were for napping, usually in whatever spot of sunlight was available, often with Baxter nearby, but evenings were special. That was Rambo and Tom. Time. "I never thought I'd be a cat person," Tom would say as Rambo kneaded his lap with those powerful paws, careful to keep his claws sheathed. Especially not a 35 pounds wild cat person. The bond between Tom and Rambo became something of local legend. Friends would visit specifically to witness the nightly ritual. Tom in his recliner, Rambo draped across him like a spotted blanket, both watching television in companionable silence. Sometimes Rambo would reach up and pat Tom's face gently with his paw as if checking that his human was still there. "He's saying thank you," Linda would say, her eyes misty as she watched them. "Every day in his own way, he's saying thank you for saving him." One particularly memorable evening, they had dinner guests, Tom's former colleagues from the veterinary clinic. As they sat in the living room after dinner, Rambo patted in carrying his favorite toy, a stuffed fish nearly as big as he was. With great ceremony, he deposited the fish at Tom's feet, then looked expectantly at the guests as if to say, "See what I can do." The room erupted in delighted laughter, as Rambo, pleased with the attention, proceeded to show off by leaping effortlessly onto his cat tree and performing what could only be described as Bobcat parkour. "He's a ham," one of the guests observed, and it was true. Rambo had discovered he enjoyed being admired as long as it was on his terms, and with people he'd been properly introduced to. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were challenges that came with sharing a home with a wild animal. No matter how bonded, Rambo had destroyed 2 couches before they learned to provide appropriate scratching surfaces. His hunting instincts, while dampened, were still present. They had to be extremely careful about small animals visiting the yard. There was also the ongoing need for specialized veterinary care. Patricia Morse, an exotic animal specialist, made monthly visits to check on Rambo's health, monitor his diet, and ensure all regulations were being followed. "You've done something remarkable here," she told them during one visit, watching as Rambo voluntarily entered a crate for his examination, motivated by nothing more than treats and trust. This level of cooperation from a bobcat is extraordinary. The first winter in his new home brought new discoveries. Rambo, it turned out, absolutely loved. No. The first significant snowfall had Linda and Tom bundled up on the porch, watching as Rambo experienced deep snow for perhaps the first time in his life. He approached it cautiously at first, patting at it with one paw, then suddenly exploded into action, leaping, pouncing, rolling in the white powder, with an expression of pure joy. Even Rosie was inspired to join him in the enclosed yard, the 2 of them creating a chaos of paw prints and snow. "Angels. Look at him," Linda laughed, filming as Rambo attempted to catch snowflakes. From death's door to this. As winter progressed, Rambo's inside time increased, and with it his integration into the family deepened. He learned the household routines, knew exactly when meals should appear, and had strong opinions about any deviations from the schedule. If Tom was late coming home from errands, Rambo would pace by the window, occasionally letting out mournful yowls. That had Linda texting her husband, "Your cat is upset with you." One evening in late February, Linda found Tom asleep in his recliner. Rambo stretched out on top of him also. sleeping. Baxter lay on the floor beside them, and even Rosie had curled up on the nearby couch. The fire crackled in the fireplace. Snow fell softly outside, and Linda felt a wave of complete contentment. She thought back to that day when Jennifer had called about a dying bobcat who needed a chance. They'd expected to provide hospice care, maybe give him a few comfortable months. Instead, they'd gained a family member who brought joy, laughter, and a wild beauty into their home every single day. From death row to the couch, she whispered, careful not to wake the sleeping pile of contentment. Rambo opened one amber eye, regarded her with what she swore was affection, and went back to sleep, his purr rumbling through Tom's chest like distant thunder. Dr. Margaret Willis from Pine Ridge visited on Rambo's 2-year adoption anniversary. She stood in amazement, watching the once-dying bobcat leap effortlessly onto his outdoor platforms, muscles rippling under a glossy coat. "I wouldn't have believed it," she said, accepting a cup of coffee from Linda. "When he left our facility, I thought we were just postponing the inevitable. He just needed to find his people," Tom said simply as Rambo patted over and rubbed against his legs. "Sometimes that's all any of us need." As if to punctuate the point, Rambo picked up his latest leaf collection. Linda had brought in fresh maple branches that morning and carried them to his favorite sunny spot. Rosie, ever hopeful, followed and made her daily attempt at leaf eating with the predictable, dramatic results. Every single day, Linda laughed as Rosie spat out the leaf and gave Rambo an accusatory look. "You'd think she'd learn. Maybe she just likes the routine," Tom suggested. "The predictability of it. Rambo eats leaves. Rosie tries and fails. All is right with the world." Later that evening, as Tom settled into his recliner for the nightly ritual, Rambo surprised them. Instead of immediately claiming his usual spot on Tom's lap, he first went to Linda, but his head against her hand for scratches, then to Baxter for a brief nose touch, and even approached Rosie, who licked his ear in greeting. Only after making his rounds did he jump onto Tom's lap, circling 3 times, before settling into his spot with a contented sigh. "He's saying thank you," Linda said, her voice thick with emotion. "To all of us." Tom stroked the soft fur between Rambo's ears, feeling the deep purr that seemed to come from the bobcat's very soul. "Nobody," he said softly. "Thank you for choosing us, for trusting us, for showing us that sometimes the most unexpected families are the most perfect ones." As night fell over the Wyoming countryside, the Brennan household settled into peaceful quiet. A rescued bobcat, who'd once been hours from euthanasia, snoozed on the couch. Golden Retriever dreamed of tennis balls. A formerly anxious border collie slept soundly, no longer afraid. And 2 humans who'd thought their retirement would involve cruise ships and golf courses instead found themselves living a wild, beautiful, unexpected life. Through the window, the stars shone bright in the clear winter sky, and if you listened carefully, you could hear the rumbling purr of a contented bobcat, a sound that spoke of second chances, unlikely friendships, and the miraculous ways love can heal even the most broken of wild hearts. Rambo was home.